Hey, I'm Angela Walters from Quilting is My Therapy. It's time to rev up your sewing machines because it's week 2 of the Free-motion Challenge Quilting Along. That's right, it's time to start quilting. Last week I shared a video that was all about the quilting along, the introduction, everything that we're doing. So if you're not sure about what I'm talking about, check out that prior video. But in this video, we're going to tackle the meander and echoing. We're going to learn how a basic meander is the perfect way to learn how to maneuver around a quilt and how to add emphasis with echoing. I may have just a little bit of a scratchy throat, but that's not going to stop us from having fun today. So first up, the basic meander. What's great about the meander is it's going to force us to learn how to work around in all directions. I have my quilt block, I'm ready to start quilting. What I'm going to do is start my quilting along the edge of the block. That's where I like to hide my starts and stops, if at all possible. What I'm going to do is lower my needle down and then up, and what that's going to do is grab my bobbin thread, and then I'm going to take a few stitches in place. Now this is how I prefer to secure the line of quilting. If you don't feel comfortable with that, you definitely don't have to do it. Then from here, what I'm going to do is start quilting a nice wiggly line. The idea is I want a line that goes in all different directions so that I can't see the path. So once I'm ready to go, I'm going to put my hands on either side of the needle. That's where I have the most control. And then I'm going to move in all different directions. Now, what I'm focusing on is really trying to keep that line nice and wiggly or meandering like. I don't want much of a path, I just want to be able to see that nice overall texture. So here I have the first part of the quilting. Now let me tell you what not to worry about right now. I'm not worrying that my stitches are all the same length. I'm not even worrying if the line is perfectly smooth. I'm just getting comfortable with moving the quilt around. And so as I'm quilting, I'm moving quilt in all different directions. Now what I'm not doing, and what I want you to try not to do, is rotating the quilt. It may be tempting, especially if you're working on a smaller fabric, to try to turn the quilt as you're quilting. That's not the case. You want to keep the top and the bottom of the quilt parallel. That means I'm moving the whole quilt instead of rotating it. Now, my worst habit, I have some bad habits, and one of them is that I often forget to reposition my hands. When you're machine quilting, you have most of your control when your hands are on either side of the needle. Well, what happens is I tend to get too much in a rush and I start quilting, and the next thing I know, my hands are over here when they really need to be on the other side of the needle. So make sure that you're pausing and repositioning your hands often. But if you're a speed demon like I am, you might find yourself repositioning your hands while your machine is still going. So go ahead and pause, let it finish stitching, and then reposition your hands. You'll get a much more smoother line if that's the case. Now, as you're quilting, here's what I don't want you to worry about. Don't worry about stitch length. Don't worry about making it perfect. Right now, all we're doing is getting comfortable moving the quilt in all different directions. Trust me, that kind of stuff will come later as you're getting more comfortable with the design. We're trying to focus on quilting a smooth line, we're trying not to pee our pants, and I'm trying to keep that spacing nice and consistent. What that means is the spacing between the lines, whatever spacing I decide to give it, I want to keep that nice and consistent. So here I have roughly a ½ of an inch in between the lines at any given time. If I keep that nice and consistent, all I'll see is the overall texture. I won't see the individual pattern. So I'm just going to eyeball it, and as soon as I start to approach another line of quilting, like I am here, I'm going to go ahead and change direction. So I'm going to try to keep them somewhat evenly spaced. Now, if you're newer to quilting, you might find that's a little tricky at first, and that's okay. That comes with practice. Sometimes worrying about things like stitch length and consistent spacing is kind of like worrying about what your handwriting is going to look like when you're still learning how to quilt. So don't stress out about that. Just keep focusing on your breathing, don't forget to breathe, and your nice meandering line. The best rule of thumb I can say is to try to make yourself go in all different directions. I know I keep saying that, but it's kind of important. So I want to make sure that I'm going up and to the right and left and down. It's going all those different directions that are really going to help me keep it nice and random. No matter the size of the quilt, we're only focusing on a space about this big. So just focus on that. Don't worry about the rest of the quilt. That will come soon enough. Just keep focusing on that area that you have to quilt and filling it in. Now, one thing I want to point out is that I'm kind of using my quilting kind of like a blob. I'm keeping it all nice and close to each other. What I don't want to do is get lots of quilting over here and then some over here, because then I'll end up with gaps in between. And I think that most people will notice a gap in the quilting before they notice an error. So I have my whole little blob right here nice and filled in. Another thing that might happen is you might find yourself getting stuck. That is completely normal. It's only after you learn a design that you can get good at not getting stuck. It's just part of the process. So let's say I work my way over here and I realize, oh no, I'm kind of stuck. I have nowhere to go. Well, what I'm going to do is not rip out the quilting. I'm not going to stress out about it. I'm just going to work my way back out, whether traveling on that line, whether I travel along the seam, or whether I cross right over it. Doesn't matter. I'm just going to get out and keep on going. It's not whether you're going to make a mistake, it's how do you handle it when you make it. And the best thing to do is just to keep on quilting. What I'm going to do is finish quilting this block, and then we'll see some fun variations that you can do with the meander. And there we have it, the first block of the Quilting Along quilt finished with the meander. Here's a couple things that I want to point out. Don't worry if it's not perfect, just keep going. The worst thing that you can do is stop halfway through and judge your quilting. You can't do that. You have to see the quilting in context of the whole design. So keep going until you fill in that block and then look at it and decide, is there something that you want to work on for next time? Now, even if you're further along in your free motion quilting journey, you might think that the meander is nice and basic and maybe not something that you need to learn. But there's some really easy ways that you can create variations with this design. You can just shrink up the spacing in between those lines, and that's going to give you a stipple or a great filler to put around something else. Or if you love them but they're not quilt worthy, space those lines out further apart so that you can get the quilt done faster. So go ahead and fill in that block with a meandering design. Even if you don't love it or think that it's something that you might not use on your quilts, it's going to really help you get used to moving the quilt around in all different directions. But before you go, I have one more technique to show you. Now we're going to take it up just a notch and do some echoing. Echoing is a fantastic way to highlight a block that you want to show off just a little bit. I like to say it's almost like putting the parentheses around your favorite part of the quilt and drawing attention to it. Before I get started with the quilting, I want to talk through a little bit about what I'm going to do. Echoing is just quilting another straight line inside or outside of a seam to really help separate it from the filler. What I'm going to do in this block is echo the inside with straight lines and then fill in that space with the meandering design. But one thing that I'm crazy about is keeping things nice and efficient. I want to be able to start on the outside of my block, quilt the whole block, and then move on. That's going to help prevent starts and stops, make it easier to continue, and really it just keeps me from getting bored, which is really the most important thing. So starting from one corner, what I'm going to do is quilt a line that comes down at a 45-degree angle. That's going to be my entry inside of the block. And then I'm going to go into echoing the rest of the block. If I do it in one corner though, I'm going to do it in every other corner so that it looks intentional. What I'm going to use though to help me quilt my straight lines is a ruler. Now I have Slim, my little straight edge ruler. I love this guy to help quilt those nice straight lines. If you don't have a ruler or you're not comfortable with it, don't worry about it. You can actually freehand it, and we'll talk about that when I get to quilting. When I'm using this technique, I usually just eyeball that 45-degree angle. But since we're working together, I thought I would show you an easy way to mark it out so that it keeps it nice and somewhat symmetrical. So if you remember the design with line stencil that I showed you in the first video, what I'm going to do is place that inside of my block and mark it with my pounce pad. Then I have my nice 45-degree angles that I can follow, helping keep it kind of nice and perfect. To use the pounce pad, I'm just going to give it a good little whack, and then I'm going to rub it over the stencil. I want to show you another way you can mark it out just in case you don't have that stencil. If you have a water-soluble marker or a chalk pencil that you like to use, what you can do is just mark out that 45-degree angle. Or, like I said, you could just go ahead and eyeball it. Either way is totally fine. All right, so let's get started. I want to reiterate though, I am using my ruler. You don't have to, and I'll show you how to do it without it. Okay, I'm set up and ready to go. And starting from that corner, I'm going to quilt a 45-degree angle, and that's going to help me get into the block so that I can start echoing the sides. Pushing down on the ruler and moving the whole quilt sandwich is going to help me use that ruler to quilt that line. Then when I get about an inch inside, what I'm going to do is start echoing the sides of my block. Now I can change that spacing depending on how big this block is. So if I want it closer, I could do 1/4 of an inch, or if I want it further apart, I can go even further. I'm going to position the ruler and quilt a line that echoes the side of my block. Now, even though I'm working with my straight edge ruler, I still only want to work within my fingertips. So once I get past my fingertips or start to approach that, I'm going to either slide my ruler or move my hands along the ruler. Either one is fine, but I really want to get in the habit of only working in between my fingertips. So reposition the ruler, taking my time, and quilting along that straight line. Now I'm using a contrasting thread so you can really see what's going on here. If you're using a matching thread color, you won't see every little bit and bobble. It's going to look fine. So I'm going to quilt, quilt, quilt until I approach just about an inch inside the next corner, and that is where I'm going to use my line to go down and right back to give it that mitered kind of look. Now I have to admit that I'm easily amused, and I kind of like how it makes it look a little bit like a picture frame, so I kind of like doing this. If you don't, you could just leave it out. It's completely up to you. But what I'm going to do is reposition my ruler, go down to that point and right back. So there will be a little bit of traveling, but if you leave that ruler in place, you won't have to worry about it slipping or coming off that line. And even if it comes off that line, it's still going to be pretty good. Now, there, I missed the point. Oh my gosh. So I'm going to rip that all out and start over. I'm just kidding. You know that's not what's going to happen. It's fine. It's close enough. Now, when I'm quilting, I love to work in a vertical motion because I use my whole body momentum to push and pull that line. But since I have a bigger quilt and it's kind of all smushed and pushed under here, what I'm going to do is just rotate the ruler and quilt along this side of the block. All right, so positioning that ruler, pushing down, and moving it along the block. And as you can see, as I start to get past my fingertips, I'm going to stop, maybe reposition the quilt if I need to, but definitely reposition my hands. I only want to work within my fingertips, using these lines right here as a guide to make sure that's running somewhat straight. I'm sure you can tell I'm not a perfectionist, so if it's not perfect, it's totally fine. I'm going to stop about an inch inside that next corner. Once I get to that point, I have my marked line right here to use as a guide. I'm going to position the ruler, but I have to remember there's about 1/4 of an inch in between the needle and the edge of the foot. What that means is if I put my ruler directly on that corner, my quilted line is actually going to be 1/4 inch away, which is not what I want. So I'm going to have to eyeball it and keep my ruler about 1/4 of an inch from that corner. And, you know, if there's something that quilters are good at, it's eyeballing that 1/4 of an inch. So I'm going to position it, go down to my corner. Let's see if I can make this one better than the last one, and come right back up, traveling along that line. So now I'm going to echo the other side and then quilting along. Now this is a nice big echo, and that's because I'm working with a bigger block. If this were smaller, I probably would do it a little bit closer, until I get about an inch or so inside that next corner. And I'm going to position my ruler and go out to my corner and right back. Right back like that. Now I'm almost done with my first echo line. You can see here I've got the 3 sides. I kind of like how it makes it look like a jewel or faceted, or really whatever artistic reason I want to give it. Now when I echo this side of the block, even if this point isn't perfectly the same as this one, I'm going to make them line up. Even if it means that that line is crooked, I would much rather have it come to a point right here than have it perfectly echoed. So I can position my ruler and then move along it. Now, if you don't have a ruler, you might find it a little tricky to get those straight lines. Well, here's the thing. We're aiming for straight-ish. If you're using just your free-motion quilting foot and you're not using your ruler, you can still quilt those nice straight lines. What I would do is maybe give it a quick little mark just to use as a guide. Sometimes it helps us if we see where we're going. I can take my time quilting along this line. But here's the most important thing. Do not get upset if this line is not perfectly straight. By the time I put all my filler in here, you're not going to see these lines as much anyway, so don't stress out about that. But what I'm going to do is just use my hands and move along that line a little bit at a time, little increments. It doesn't have to be one continuous line. Now, as I approach my corner, as I'm coming to here, I'm going to look and see how I'm going. I might need to veer up just a bit to make it match. And you can see here I have my beautiful block with all its echoing. So I'm going to start from this point, quilt my meandering line, filling in this area. And what's going to be great is that's going to help hide any little bobbles in my quilting. But I want to try to get back to where I started. So I'm going to wiggle my way right out here, work my way all the way around the block and coming back to that point. Okay, I'm approaching that first diagonal line that I quilted. I'm going to work my way up to it, travel along that line, and that's going to get me to the edge of my block. And if I wanted to, I can easily continue quilting to the next block, but I think that's going to be it for today. Let's see how it looks. I'm really loving how the echoing separates it from the filler and really kind of gives this block a little bit of a more custom look, really putting the emphasis on that block. Now, if you've ever seen any of my quilting, chances are you've already picked up on the fact that I like to echo blocks. It's something that I do all the time, and I have a couple examples of other quilts I've done it on. So this particular technique is straight out of my book, Shape by Shape Quilting 2, and I love how you can use it in all sorts of blocks, not just squares. So in this example, I've quilted the inside of a hexagon block doing the same idea. If you really love the person you're quilting it for, or you just want to show off a little bit, you can put some filler inside it as well. Now, like I said, this is the perfect technique to use in a quilt where the blocks are the most important thing, where you really want to enhance and highlight those blocks. Now, this particular home quilt was pieced by Julie Herman. It's one of the quilts in her amazing book, Alphabet Soup. And since the letters are the most important thing, I knew that echoing would be the best way to separate it from all that crazy, dense filler that I put around it. As you can tell, I like echoing so much, I did it inside and outside of the block. Okay, now it's your turn. You've seen me quilt the basic meander and use echoing in my blocks. Now it's time for you to actually practice. Now when it comes to practice time, honestly, you can do whatever you like. You can practice both of them, you can practice one, or you can just practice drawing. Whatever it is, just try it out. Then post a picture on social media using the hashtag Free-motion Challenge, and I'll pick a lucky winner by the end of next week. So let me know if you have any questions, and I'll see you next week when we talk about continuous curve quilting and how to make motifs and all over designs with it. I'll see you then, and happy quilting.